Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today on consumer engagement, helping people want what they need. My name is Michael Rausch, and I'm the Director of the Real Economic Impact Network at the National Disability Institute. I would like to give a special thank you to our sponsor, Bank of America, who supports our webinar series that we do on a monthly basis. Before we get started, we would like to go over some housekeeping tips, and so I would like to turn it over to my colleague, Nakia Matthews, to go over that information with us now. Nakia?
Thank you, Michael. Good afternoon, everyone. The audio for today's webinar is being broadcast through your computer. Please make sure that your speakers are turned on or that you have headphones plugged in. You can control the audio broadcast via the audio broadcast panel, which you see an image of here on the screen. If you accidentally close this panel or if the sound somehow stops, you can reopen the audio broadcast by going to the Communicate menu at the top of your screen and choosing Audio Broadcast. If you do not have sound capabilities on your computer, or if you prefer to listen by phone, you can dial the toll or toll-free number that you see here and enter the meeting code. Please note that you do not need to enter an attendee ID. I will paste the phone number and meeting code into the chat box in just a second. We are providing real-time captioning during this webinar. The captions can be found in the Media Viewer panel, which should appear in the lower right-hand corner of your webinar platform. If you do not see the captions, you may need to open the Media Viewer panel by selecting the Media Viewer button in the upper right-hand corner of the webinar platform. If you would like to make the Media Viewer panel larger, you can do so by minimizing some of the other panels like chat or Q&A, and conversely, if you do not want to see the captions, you can collapse that panel. I will also paste a link in the chat box in just a second with the captions so you can view them in a web browser if you choose to do so. We will have time for questions at the end of the webinar. Please submit any questions that you may have during the course of the webinar in the Q&A box, and we will direct those questions accordingly during the Q&A portion. If you are listening by phone only and not logged into the web portion, you may also ask questions by emailing them to me directly at nmatthews@ndi-inc.org. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and the materials will be placed on NDI's website. And finally, if you experience any technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box to send a message to me, NDI admin, or you can email me at nmatthews@ndi-inc.org. And with that, I will turn it back over to Michael.
Great. Thank you, Nakia. So for those of you who might be new to the National Disability Institute, I just want to share with you a little bit about us right quick. The National Disability Institute, our mission is to drive social impact to build a better economic future for people with disabilities and their families. At the National Disability Institute, we have the Real Economic Impact Network, which is an alliance of organizations and individuals dedicated to advancing the economic empowerment of people with disabilities. It consists of more than 4,500 members located throughout the United States, and it includes nonprofits, community tax coalitions, asset development organizations, financial education initiatives, corporations, and private sector businesses, as well as federal, state, local governments and agencies, as well as individuals and families with disabilities. And through the Real Economic Impact Network, we all join forces to embrace, promote, and pursue access to and the inclusion of people with disabilities in the economic mainstream. To learn more about the Real Economic Impact Network, please go to our website at www.realeconomicimpact.org. So for today's webinar, we are very fortunate to have two of the authors, Timothy Flocka as well as Kristen Bryant, who are with Commonwealth. And this important paper that they put together, a report, on consumer engagement and helping people want what they need, was put out by the Asset Funders Network, and it was supported by MetLife Foundation to put this information out there. And so today we're very fortunate that we're going to hear from the two authors to help us understand what is consumer engagement. The report helps to provide a framework on how financial empowerment tools that are created by practitioners and individuals are ultimately used by the consumers that we work with, to really help them prosper and build their financial lives. And so with today's webinar, we're going to define and explain key terms on consumer engagement, as well as illustrate the ideas that are presented in the report, and some case studies for us to better understand this, and then also how we can potentially incorporate some of this information that they have put in this brief. Commonwealth has been a great resource to the National Disability Institute, as well as to the Real Economic Impact Network. And so we're very fortunate to have Timothy Flocka, who's the Executive Director, as well as Kristen Bryant, who's the Innovation Manager, here to present this information to us. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Kristen and Tim to get things started.
Thanks so much, Michael. And we're honored to be able to present with NDI. We've worked with and known NDI for a number of years and have great respect for their work. Just briefly, Commonwealth is a mission-driven organization that builds solutions to make people financially secure. Some of you may have known us as D2D Fund or Doorways to Dreams Fund, which was our name until very recently. As the slide says, we believe that lasting social and economic prosperity requires really that everyone have wealth, wealth of opportunity, of tools, and of financial assets. We seek to grow our Commonwealth and to make wealth more common. Some of you may be familiar with work we've done over many years to encourage saving and wealth creation at tax time. And over the last several years, we've run a national tax time savings promotion called Save Your Refund. So if that helps place us, you might be familiar with that. So to get us started, you'll see this come up on your screen. We wanted to take us to 1989 and the film Field of Dreams, and you should be looking at a picture of the character, the main character from that film, Ray Kinsella, who you may or may not recall was an Iowa corn farmer. And the famous refrain from that line is, "If you build it, they will come." This is what this character Ray hears throughout the movie. And so why would we put Ray up here to begin? Because we believe that possibly sometimes we are like Ray. We believe in our hearts that if we build or deliver financial empowerment or financial capability or asset building tools, then naturally people will come and use them. And why? Why might we think that? Well, to start, for many of us, the work of building these tools and getting them to market and to people, it's hard. And the mere process of building the tools can overwhelm us, where we lose track of this almost secondary question of whether or not people are getting them and using them and benefiting from them. But beyond that very straightforward reason, I think another consideration is that many of us are the good guys, or we believe we are the good guys, and we're in it for the right reasons. And here's where Ray comes up, because Ray was the epitome of earnest in this movie, Field of Dreams. Simple, straightforward, pure of heart. And the trap, perhaps, for those of us who want to be the good guys is that we may assume that our good intentions automatically or inevitably generate good results. But of course, when we say it that way, we know that purity of purpose is not a guarantee that the things that we build or we seek to offer will be appealing to the people that we want to reach, much less will be taken up, used by those people, and generate a substantial, lasting difference. And it was really reflecting on our own work over the past 15 years at Commonwealth or D2D Fund, and through conversations and observations with colleagues that we realized that there are some learnings about this dilemma that we might be able to bring to the field. So that has led us to this notion of consumer engagement. And before we dive in and describe what we see as a framework for thinking about this set of issues, we thought it's always a challenge in webinars to know where your audience is. So we're going to ask you to fill out a poll, and I think we'll put that up on screen here momentarily. And the poll question is fairly straightforward. The question is, how many of you feel that you have, if you will, built your baseball diamond in a cornfield? That would be the reference to Field of Dreams. That is, you've created some financial empowerment tool or initiative, but then been disappointed that people did not show up, that you didn't have the participation, the take-up, or the impact that you expected to have. And we've offered here 3 answers. You can see, yeah, this sounds right. This is a real challenge in our work. Or, maybe, yeah, sometimes. Or, no, not so much. This really doesn't apply. And I think it'd be helpful for us as presenters and perhaps interesting for you on the webinar to see where we are as a group in response to that question. So if you haven't already, please take a moment and, reflect and then go ahead and fill out the poll. And in a moment, we'll start to see results generated from that. When Kristen and I have had a chance to do this talk in person, we can gauge in our audience how many people nod their head when they see the picture of Kevin Costner playing this character of Ray Kinsella. We obviously can't do that in the context of a webinar, so if this is a reference that means nothing to you, then please forgive us. All right, so I see on the screen I'm looking at that the poll has ended, so I think momentarily we should see actual results from the poll itself. Okay, so it looks like slightly more than half of us say, yes, this is a real challenge. Almost the same slice are telling us that, yeah, sometimes this is a challenge, and only a handful of you, a couple of you, feel this doesn't apply. All right, that's really helpful for us because it gives us a sense of how people feel about the topic, so thank you for that. So to get us started, as I mentioned, we have a framework that we've derived as we thought about these issues, and so I want to introduce that because that will guide us through the rest of this webinar. And again, as a reminder, the core idea here is that we want to produce tools and initiatives that consumers will really use and therefore make a difference. And our first pillar is what we call demand focus. And by this, we really mean a mindset or a philosophy about financial empowerment efforts. And I'll describe this in more detail in a moment. The second pillar is really more of a how do you do it and what do we need to achieve in order to reach clients. And we call that pillar deep connection. And the last pillar is really the holy grail outcome that we're aiming for, and we call that one enthusiastic use. So let's go ahead and talk about the first pillar, demand focus. And when we use this phrase demand focus, what we are contrasting it with is supply. And the distinction there is important because supply is more about us and what we're trying to do. Demand, we feel, is really about the consumers or the clients that we are trying to reach and what they want and where they're trying to go. And as we think about that distinction, one thing that comes to mind, and here you can see the picture is reminding us of this, is that people have choices. And with choices comes agency. And we believe that the core of financial empowerment is cultivating, reinforcing, and encouraging that sense of agency, that's central to what most of us want to accomplish. We want to honor and support that sense of agency in the people that we're serving. So that's a lot of language. What does that mean in practice? Well, it means we need to start by observing what consumers are doing today, because we believe that contains really important wisdom. People are making choices about how to spend their money, about how to spend their time, about which opportunities to pursue. And we think it can be constructive to think of ourselves as detectives whose job it is, as a starting point, to uncover those choices that are being made today and to really understand them. Another piece of this is, rather than thinking about our work as trying to, quote unquote, get people to change, we can think about our work as trying to build from, perhaps redirect, behaviors that people are engaged in already. And so what that means in practice is we need to be very careful about offering tools or services or experiences or products that make the price of entry consumers doing something dramatically different than what they are doing today. In our earnestness to help, we can't make change a prerequisite for use. We have to think about change of behavior as something that evolves from and is a byproduct of use or experiencing the tools or products that we put out. So what I'd like to do is turn it over to my colleague, Kristen, who can take some of those words and illustrate them with an example we'll draw from our own experience here. Kristen.
Thanks, Tim. So I want to take everyone back into earlier this year. How many of us got caught up in the Powerball madness? I don't even play the lottery, and I found myself at a local convenience store playing a random set of numbers for the chance to win $500 million. After all, who could really pass on that chance for a windfall of cash? While it may have been a once-in-a-blue moon moment for me and maybe some of you on the phone, playing the lottery is a very popular consumer behavior. Consider that annually, lottery sales top $70 billion, which equates to the average household spending over $500 a year on lottery tickets. Studies show that this behavior is particularly prevalent among households with lower incomes. So in observing this lottery play behavior and trying to understand what made it compelling, we at Commonwealth have tried to unpack why this is interesting, particularly for the financially vulnerable consumers who we're trying to reach. In doing so, we began to refine the concept of prize-linked savings. We allowed these preferences and existing behaviors to inform our strategy. Prize-linked savings is the concept of giving consumers the chance to win prizes by saving money. It leverages the fun and compelling parts of lottery to encourage positive financial action taking. We've now been doing work with prize-linked savings for over 8 years, and what we've found is that people love it, partially because it encourages saving by meeting people where they are, understanding that saving is sometimes something that's difficult to do, and trying to match that reality with a behavior that's already taking place. Beyond that, it's a no-lose proposition, so there's really no risk. Yes.
All right, thank you, Kristen. So I will take back over here and introduce the second pillar of our framework, which we call deep connection. And so it's this is our way of thinking about the how. How would it be that we can redirect existing behaviors, that we can honor this sense of agency that I think most of us are trying to cultivate. And the key, we believe, is to build or create with the consumers that we hope to reach. So some thoughts about that. One way to think about financial empowerment work is that it is, at its essence, social change work. And we're trying to change the world and help consumers get where they want to go, and one could say that that's really behavior change. But what we know from countless research, but also just from our own lives, I think, is that changing our behavior is really hard. And it's important to remember that and to recognize that. So as we think about how we go about our work, what can we do to make that hard behavior change easier. And we believe one thing is to make sure that the consumers we're trying to reach and serve feel connected to the product, service, or offering. Ideally, that they're even passionate about it. So how we go about building or delivering these services and tools is one of our key ways to build that sense of connection. So what does that mean in practice? Well, clearly, if we have been detectives and understood what people are doing today and why, we need to reflect that, what we have learned in our designs for products and services and tools. But beyond that, we want to find ways to bring our target consumers into the very process of developing new stuff, whether it's experiences or products or tools. Ideally, their involvement should be not just a one-time moment, but iterative. We have found in our own work, and I think most of us can relate to this, we rarely get it right the first time out, and that regular, again, iterative or recurring touch points with the very people we hope to serve is a really important strategy to calibrate and to make sure that we are producing something that does engender a sense of trust and connection, and therefore has this foundation for behavior change. We also know that good products or services need to adapt over time as the people we aim to serve themselves change and the social conditions around us change. So let me again turn it over to Kristen, who'll try and illustrate what that might mean in practice, drawing on some of our work.
So Tim just mentioned how interventions should flow from consumer research. And I think it's really well illustrated by the work that we have done with video games. So you'll see on the screen images from a very popular mobile game called Candy Crush. Candy Crush boasts over 500 million downloads, and also on the screen is an image from Angry Birds. And Angry Birds now has a portfolio of over 5 versions, which include Angry Birds Star Wars and Angry Birds Seasons. The consumer demand for light, casual mobile games was very apparent. But how can someone really tap into this behavior to promote financial empowerment? That really required us to involve the very audience that we sought to serve. At the same time, there was, and still is, a gap in the knowledge of financial concepts, but for some consumers, traditional financial education was not meeting their needs. So, in 2010, we began to explore making financial capability video games. At the core of our development process was the consumer. For each of the games, we got a group of people together to play. We watched them, wrote down questions they had, and often facilitated a discussion of what they liked and disliked about the game experience. We have allowed these insights to guide the development of all 6 of our games and continue to use this process when we make them. The topics that are covered remain salient to this group, and even the themes are influenced by consumer preferences. In our most recent game, which is called Condom If You Can, was developed in partnership with FINRA Investor Education Foundation. Not only were consumers involved in playing the game prior to its release, but we also did an initial survey to understand themes that would resonate the most. We landed with a game that has a 1960s crime look and feel, an idea that we never would have come up with on our own. The FINRA Foundation took a chance and allowed this feedback to be at the forefront of development, resulting in a game where people actually put themselves in the shoes of a con artist, which I think is definitely an unlikely outcome if we had just been sitting around the table and thinking of ideas ourselves. Ultimately, by responding and iterating and incorporating consumer feedback, we now have a portfolio of games that has logged hundreds of thousands of gameplays across the country. We have focused on seeing those we serve as customers who make the choice to engage with our games. This has been fundamental for us to allow them to guide the design of games, which may be different from other approaches. However, we believe that this generates the outcome of voluntary and enthusiastic use, which is the third pillar of this approach that I'll have Tim detail next.
Thanks, Kristen. So what is it all aiming for, and how might we know if we're succeeding? That really speaks to this last pillar, which we call voluntary and enthusiastic use. Essentially, that consumers really want what you have to offer. Some thoughts about why that would be important. Well, the easy one is that, of course, when somebody wants what you have to offer, it's that much easier to deliver and scale and grow it. That's a pretty intuitive point. But the thing that might be easier to overlook is that that desire and attraction to what we might have, what we might offer, is critical to this notion of adopting new behaviors. Many of the audience, the folks I've had a chance to talk to, have some background in education. And while I'm not a teacher, one thing I've learned is that coerced students are the most challenging learners. No one wants to stand up in front of a classroom and try to persuade students to learn something if they really don't want to be there. Or for those of you who are parents, you can probably relate to once children perceive that you're trying to force them to try a new food, you know, the battle is lost, right? The best parents somehow figure out how to present that food in a way that the kids are curious and want to find out what that new taste is. You know, these analogies aren't perfect. I don't believe that in our work it's helpful to think about our customers or our clients as children, clearly, but the parallel is that all of us are more receptive to new ideas, new behaviors, to change itself when we perceive there's something attractive for us to get, something that we want. The picture that's up on your screen here is of a runner wearing a Fitbit. And the reason that we have that picture is that it seems like a fairly current example of a fairly clever outcome where some entrepreneurs developed something that has helped millions of us actually want to exercise. That seems to be the genius of Fitbit, something that most of us recognize is good for us, but rarely have thought of as attractive or fun or something that we're drawn to, has managed to get us to a point where people are sitting around the water cooler and saying, well, how many steps did you get? Or did you accept the challenge that I issued yesterday? So it's a recent illustration of how it is possible through careful design to take things that are good for us and make them into things that we actually desire. So what does that look like in practice? At a nuts and bolts level, we have found it's really important to think about certainly initial adoption rates, trial rates of whatever it is that we have to offer, whether it's a new product or a workshop. But beyond just how many people show up for that first contact, to also think carefully about what we would call adoption rates. Are people coming back for a second class? Are they taking a second dose? Are they using a product or service or tool repeatedly over time? Beyond that, to look for signs of progression from one product to a next or from one feature to a next. That's a sign that someone is truly enthusiastically using or consuming what it is that we have to offer. Referral rates would be another one. We also know that it is important, even if you have great success with trial and adoption and repeat use and referral, to recognize that that's not likely to remain the same over time, that we need to keep adapting. In a sense, going back to the earlier parts of the framework we described, doing original research to find out how your customers' preferences and interests and needs and current behaviors have changed, being open to involving those customers again in development of new features or evolutions of your products or services, and then keeping close track to see if that's leading to that enthusiastic voluntary use. So what I'd like to do is on the next slide, just briefly to recap. So with a demand focus, really important to understand your client's financial choices today and to consider those choices and behaviors as holding tremendously important clues to what they value and what their needs are. And to remember also that if we put behavior change as a barrier to use, we're probably getting the sequence wrong. The second thing to remember is that the way that we develop new stuff matters, and our goal should be to develop in a way that fosters a deep relationship, not only through the development process itself, but in the outcome of what we produce. And then finally, as we just talked about, the true north that we believe is worth aiming for is this test of, are people enthusiastic and without coercion voluntarily using or consuming or showing up for the things that we have to offer. And a cross-cutting observation that has come up for us in our work and may be of some use is that fun is a recurring useful frame. If you can infuse what you have to offer with an element of excitement or interest or fun, it's rarely a bad move. All right, so what we'd like to do now is we have one more user poll. This is a chance for us to get a sense, having talked at you all for a little while, how the message is resonating for you. So the question is very simply, does this consumer engagement framework resonate for you? And we've offered you three simple choices, a yes, absolutely, somewhat, but I have a few concerns, or not really. This doesn't really fit for us, and I have some serious or grave concerns. So if you go ahead and fill that out for us, as we head into the more interactive Q&A part of the discussion, it'll give us a sense of where you all are at and possibly help inform which questions we try to address. While you're doing that, you can see up on screen, if you'd like a longer version of what we're talking about today, or you want to share it with colleagues, we do have this report, which, as Michael mentioned, we did in conjunction with the Asset Funders Network. It's available on our own website, buildcommonwealth.org. Just select the Our Impact section at the top and look for consumer engagement. You could also put that into the search feature. And you can have your very own copy there of a broccoli ice cream cone. All right, in a moment here, I think we'll see the results of the polling so we can all have a sense of where we're at. And I think after that, we'll ask Michael to take back over here and lead us into some Q&A. All right, so I think the poll has ended, so any moment now we should get a sense of where everyone is at.
And just before, I will just take a moment, Tim, just to let you guys on the phone know how you can stay in touch with us. We'll leave this slide up, and definitely if you have any other questions outside of just the consumer engagement framework about the work that we're doing, or anything specific to the examples that we had in this slide deck, please do feel free to ask us, and of course we'd love to stay in touch.
That's right. And I'm not clear if folks can see the results on their own screen, but it looks like quite similar to the first poll question. A little more than half of us say this does resonate very clearly. Almost as many have some questions or concerns, so I think that should be a nice segue into the Q&A, and only a couple of you don't think this fits. So thank you for completing that poll. Michael, can we pass the baton back to you?
Great, thanks Tim, and thanks Kristen for sharing this information and for giving us an overview of what consumer engagement is, and also sharing some examples. So we do have quite a few questions that have come in, and if others have questions, please go on and submit them. We're going to try to get through as many of these that we can, and you can send them in the chat box, or you can continue to email them to me and or Nakia. So to get us started here, the first question is, how do we know the tools we select are the right tools to engage individuals?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Absent a specific context, forgive us if our answer is a little bit general. Certainly, research and talking directly to not only your current customers or clients, but your prospective customers and clients, or if this language fits, the folks who have chosen to decline in the past can give you important information about where there may be a fit. I would also say, and again, this may seem like a straightforward suggestion, but I would ask people at the end of an experience or the conclusion of the use of a product, you won't always get direct and useful feedback, but you certainly won't get it if you don't ask for it and make it clear that you're interested.
I will just add a very specific example. I was talking to a woman who offered a financial coaching option at a job center, and she was saying that they had significant drop-off between the people who showed up for the first financial coaching session and those who did not return for the second. And after talking about it, her idea was to actually reach out to those people specifically, not in a way to force them to come back, but to figure out what they could have changed in that transitionary period to make sure they would keep coming back for more. So they've obviously done a good job with getting people to show up, but sometimes it's about how do you make sure that you can adapt the kind of next step in your program to accommodate the reality once people get further down in the engagement line.
Great. So as a follow-up to that, you know, as you're evaluating and getting the information from the individuals, is it best to do a focus group, or have you seen where folks could get this information, you know, in a evaluation that's been done after an initial class? What's the best approach to gather that information from the individual?
I would say that there probably is not just a cure-all or a one-size-fits-all approach. It really depends on who you're working with and the relationships that a lot of your frontline staff may have with your clients. I think about an example of that is actually captured in the full report of a credit union who used mainly conversations with tellers and their customers, their members, to inform kind of their next steps in developing a product. So I think that the information that can be helpful to understanding the folks that you serve can be gathered in a variety of ways. And you should value any information that comes in, whether that is through formal surveys or even one-off conversations that your staff may be having with clients outside of formal settings as well.
Just have one thought to add, which is, you know, sometimes people provide us feedback in less obvious ways, but really important ways. And I think Kristen's example in the prior question illustrates that if people are not showing up, you know, they're providing you feedback. We may not always want to see it that way or kind of have the presence of mind to take, you know, that kind of uncomfortable experience as a form of feedback. If you need to show participation in a workshop and people don't come, we tend to think of that as a problem, you know, and that's something that we're unhappy about in the moment. But there is this way in which, again, this idea that people have choices to make and they've made a choice to spend their precious time somewhere else, and to view that as a source of intelligence or data that they're providing us is kind of a different frame. And then the question might become, is it because they really don't like what you're saying and what you have to offer, or is it something different altogether, that you picked a time when the bus route that many of them need to take is simply not available? And I think it's important to be open to both kinds of answers, the very specific, tangible explanations and the broader, you know, more substantive reasons people might not use what we have.
Great, thank you. So the next question, it's a two-part question. What are the best incentives to give individuals? And the follow-up to that is, are there too many to give or too frequent?
Well, I think one thing that may be useful to think about here is the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic incentives. And so that's sort of fancy language, but you know, when we think about intrinsic incentives, it's that there's something about the experience we offer that is inherently rewarding for people. An example of that might be, you know, in our own work at least, we've found many people find gameplay to be intrinsically satisfying, that there's something for many human beings about the chance to kind of solve a puzzle that scratches some deep itch. You know, in many ways that's sort of the holy grail because it's baked into the experience and it's often costless. Those can be hard to find, right? You can't make everything into a game, clearly, but I think it's useful to keep that as our perhaps highest and best form of incentive. Extrinsic incentives is probably what most of us are more apt to think of. That's the, you know, the everything from the free cookies that we put out at a workshop to the matches that might exist on a savings account. These are the quantifiable benefits that we offer people, or bribes in some cases. And I think, you know, without looking at the specifics of what the questioner has in mind, I would say as a general rule, we have found that when there's an element of suspense, so prizes, frequency of chances to win seems to matter a lot. People really like to win and appear to ascribe a higher value to the act of having their name drawn than to the actual value of what the thing is that they win. So in other words, you kind of get some lift simply by drawing the name from the hat and having somebody have their number come up. At the same time, you know, people are savvy, and if what they're winning is just you know, a nickel, they don't take it as seriously. So you may want to also have at least one prize of enough magnitude that people are excited about the possibility of it being, you know, that they would win something of value. That may be restricted to the use of chances and prizes.
I'll just add 2 additional points. I would say that a big thing that we've found is really that people just want to know the rules of the game too. So with whatever you decide your own frequency might be for offering incentives, just make sure that you've communicated that well, and that people know when the drawing will happen and what frequency that's going to happen for a while. And then the other short story that I'll share with you is we've talked to some people who actually found what resonated most with their population was pillows. These were women, they were serving, is a nonprofit in Texas that was serving a lot of women, and they found that whenever they had kind of prizes available, what resonated the most was pillows. So they knew that that was their kind of grand prize when they gave things away, which seems very silly, but I think it's actually a great illustration of how prizes just have to be meaningful to your audience. They don't have to be, you know, high in monetary value. They just have to have some sense of value with the clients and the people that you're trying to help.
Great, thank you. And that kind of leads to one of the other questions that came in. How do we know the right prize? And I think the example you gave about the pillow, you know, that's how we know, really understanding our audience. You know, when we had done a similar piece with youth with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and when we looked, and they participated in a financial education class, and when we looked at what the prize was, or what at the end of the day, you know, to keep them involved and engaged, was a field trip and a pizza party. The big piece is that they got a certificate. And for them, getting a certificate and their picture taken was really that prize, that piece for them that really you know, got them engaged. So I think it's really important for us to remember. It's what Kristen and Tim had said, is that it's really important that we know our audience to be able to understand that. So let's go on to some other questions here. In this model, what was the characteristics of the audience, such as age, race, financial status? I think that might be relating to some of the examples that you were giving and looking at consumer engagement.
Sure. So I can speak to our games that were developed, and then I can also speak briefly about the work with prize-linked savings. But for our game development, we really built our games thinking about adults ages 18 to 35, and really women just as key drivers of household finances. How can we create something that will be a useful tool for, the managers of household finances? And it really cut across that small age group in terms of what we've seen for the use of our games. We've actually seen them be very popular among high school and middle school teachers who use them in their classrooms or use them as supplements to their curriculum. We've also found that we have a slightly older crowd who's playing Condom If You Can. I think part of that is coming from the content of investor protection and really who our key partner is in that way. And so that's really been the breakdown. We don't have as much information as we'd like to have about race and gender, so I can't provide many more details than that. In terms of prize-linked savings, prize-linked savings has been operational in about, I'd say, 8 states for a longer period of time, and most recently we have about 21 states that are where prize-linked savings is legal, mainly through a credit union offered product that we helped design called Save to Win. So some of the findings from that particular prize-linked savings product show that we're reaching a lot of folks who have at least one measure of financial vulnerability, which is either lack of assets or lower incomes for their states. That obviously varies by geography as it's kind of a national program that stretches across very different areas. There is appeal both in rural and urban communities, and again, across the gender gap as well.
Great, thank you. So we have about 6 more minutes for questions, and we have several to get in. So we might need to do a speed round to see how many we can get through. But we can also follow up with everyone with any questions that we don't get answered right away. So the next question is, how could we use this model for behavior modification for those who are low income and try to encourage them to become financially stable?
Well, so one thing to just be clear about is that our mission is to really work with and support what we call financially vulnerable people, and that often means low income. So just to be clear, the frame of reference for our work and our examples is already with that audience. I guess we'll think out loud, and Kristen may have thoughts if there's anything in particular about the framework that would be unique or modified for lower income people. I tend to think that the value in this way of thinking is to recognize people's similarities rather than to necessarily assume that income makes us different in terms of our desire to be respected through the process of development or the need to observe closely what choices people are making today. So yeah, not to in any way suggest the question is off base, but I think there is power in not starting with an assumption that income would make us different in terms of how we respond to those parts of the framework.
Well, I'll also say on a very tangible level, I think the difference in this approach is it's different from saying, oh, I think that the lower income clients that I serve don't want to come to financial coaching sessions, and starting with that assumption would be a different model than what our approach is. How can you really spend time understanding what, if there is a difference or you think there may be a difference in the behaviors of your lower income clients, how can you talk with them so that their challenges and their priorities are heard first before designing or before changing a program that you may be offering. So I think in terms of how you could implement something for your lower income clients, it again really starts with that demand focus. How can you spend time with them? You already know them, I'm sure, but really trying to understand what those challenges are that they're facing and how you might be able to offer a program in a new or different way to generate the most impact.
Great. Great. Thank you. So the next question is, I'm trying to engage the workforce, factory workers in particular. What are some ideas, suggestions for this population? That might be a bigger question than what we have time for, but if you have a quick answer or, some general thoughts.
So I would just, I would say one thing really quickly. So we worked with this Staples Inc., the large office supplier, for a number of years, implementing our games as part of a workplace financial wellness program for them. And what was interesting about working with Staples is that while they have employee base of about 40,000 across the country, some of whom work in their headquarters here in Massachusetts, some of them, who work in warehouses and distribution centers and call centers, they have a very diverse population of workers and what that work life looks like. And it was very important as we started implementing gameplay and thought about reaching their different employees to say, what is the average work day look like, and where are there points in time to intervene with information that may look different than sending an email at headquarters. It may be thinking about the break room in a call center. It may be thinking about, what could go in a script for a manager at the beginning of a shift at a warehouse. So I just offer that as an example to think about, what can you find out about the specific points in time in their day so that you can make a program that can really resonate with their realities.
Great, thank you. The next question is, do you think that we or the field use the wrong terms such as financial education, financial coaching that doesn't engage or resonate to individuals? Do you have suggestions on other words we should be using?
I think that's a really great question, and I don't think that Kristen or I have the answer to what the right term is for any of those particular use cases, but I think what comes up a lot, well, let me interrupt myself. In other contexts where we've had this conversation with people, it's been with funders, and one thing that you realize when you're thinking about funders is that for most of us who have to figure out how to pay for what we do, we have kind of two different sets of clients, right? We have the clients that we think we're here to serve, and then we have our customers, which are the ones that actually write the checks to us if we're receiving philanthropy. And the danger in that is that, that's confusing. So what am I saying? I mean, financial coaching, for example, if you find that the people who you want to offer that service to are reluctant and are not signing up, then maybe we have the wrong name. Maybe we have the wrong way to conceptualize it. Which could be anything from the connotations. Maybe coaching conjures up to the people we're trying to reach a sense of more wealth, or maybe it conjures up too much depth of revealing information about ourselves, or maybe they think they have to sign up for an intensive long-term thing and they don't want any part of that. The only way to find that out is, of course, to talk to folks and to be open to the idea that the language or the way we conceptualize what we're doing doesn't align with what they care about. And whether it's the factory situation or this around coaching, one thing that can be helpful is to view it as, back to this idea of detectives, it's our job to keep probing and to try to find out, like, what's the pressing challenge that they see, what's the language that they use, and then to let go of the way we may have written it into a grant or the way we're used to talking about it among ourselves, and to try to build from the way they see the issue or problem. If you're not speaking to something they care about, you've just made your job way harder.
Great. And one more question here. Are the games that you mentioned free to access?
Yeah, so our games are free online at financialentertainment.org. I'm going to go back to the slide here. If you can play our games. We make them available for free to educators and financial practitioners, probably like most of you on the site. If you're interested in doing a tournament or generating information about the people who are playing a game from your organization, then that would be something that we could talk about offline. I'm more than happy to continue that conversation. But they're available online at www.financialentertainment.org, and you can also search for a few of those games in the Apple and Google Play stores as well.
Great. Thank you.
And Michael,
yes.
I did just want to say one thing right before we wrap up. I think that through all of this, as we talked about the demand focus and really thinking about understanding the financial realities of your client base, it really is important to remember how valued people feel even when you ask them the question. And so I think that we shouldn't lose in thinking about how to implement something like this at your organization, the power of just asking someone that you're working with what they think or how is this going, or really trying to get feedback from them that you can immediately implement. And so we found that to be incredibly valuable to the work that we've done. It's informed a lot of our decisions, and I just don't want to lose that as we've had this kind of question and answer session.
Great. Thank you, Kristen. With that, I would like to thank Tim and Kristen again for coming and sharing this information with us. Everybody will receive a copy of the PowerPoint, and this webinar is recorded. You're also going to receive a copy of the link to read the full report or brief on consumer engagement and helping people want what they need. And so we hope that you will take it to the time to review that and to read it. And then if you have any questions, please follow up with us. I do want to remind everyone that if you have not taken the pledge, we encourage you to help us disable poverty. This is a grassroots campaign which aims to increase awareness about the nearly 1 in 3 Americans with disabilities that live in poverty and remain outside the economic mainstream. So to take the pledge, you can go to disablepoverty.org. Again, if you have not signed up for the Real Economic Impact Network, we encourage you to sign up and be a part of this movement. You can sign up on our website at www.realeconomicimpact.org. Also, if you have any questions on strategies to build the financial wellness of individuals with disabilities, you can send your questions to ask@ndi-inc.org. Again, I'd like to say thank you to Commonwealth for bringing us this information and spending the afternoon with us. We also would like to thank each of you for attending today's webinar, and definitely want to thank my colleague, Nakia Matthews, for all of the work that she does behind the scenes here to make our webinar series run so smoothly. Our next webinar will be in December, and it will be with the Federal Reserve Bank, where we are talking about My RA. So please join us for that as well. With that, I hope everybody has a great afternoon, and thank you again for participating.